They are taking away his farm. How shameful! Walter Hayes, a 74-year-old farmer, has devoted his whole life to caring for his family land. But after 6 decades of hard work, the bank decided to take it all away. No one in the town thought this day would come. But on a chilly October morning, Walter put up a for sale sign in front of the farm. A final end to a legacy that had been passed down for generations. But he didn't know that just 2 days later, an unbelievable event would occur. Something no one could have foreseen. And it would change his life forever. Walter Hayes was born and raised on the very land that his father and grandfather had built from scratch. Unlike modern farms that use industrial machinery, the Hayes farm still operates in a traditional way, a laborious job but one filled with pride. Every morning for more than 60 years, Walter wakes up before dawn, steps outside into the morning mist to check on the livestock, milks the cows, and tends to the vegetable rows as if they were a part of his very being. He never complains, never considers giving up, for to him, this is not just a job. It is family, it is heritage, it is everything he has. Most people in town know of the Hayes farm. When the harsh winter arrives, Walter quietly leaves boxes of fresh vegetables on his neighbors' porches. During Thanksgiving, he often brings baskets of apples to the church to give to struggling families. When the school holds a harvest festival, the children eagerly come to his farm to pick pumpkins, for Walter has never charged any of them. "You can't put a price on a child's smile," he often says with the warm voice of someone who has spent a lifetime giving. But then, everything changed. Walter had never been late on a payment in 30 years. However, when the bank changed hands, numbers on paper came to mean more than people. A letter arrived stating that his loan no longer met the new standards. No one bothered to acknowledge the years he had devoted to this land. No one cared about the charity meals he contributed to the community. To them, Walter Hayes was just a name on a list of debts to be processed. And if he could not meet the unreasonable new conditions, they would seize everything. Walter sat at the dining table, surrounded by stacks of bills. In front of him lay the final letter from the bank, a foreclosure notice for the farm. He had witnessed his father fight to keep this land and his grandfather overcome the Great Depression, but now everything could end just because of a cold line on a contract. As each day passed, he watched the neighboring farms being swallowed one by one. The Lewis farm, where he had once played as a child, was now abandoned. The Whitaker farm, renowned for its sprawling wheat fields, had also been sold. And now it was his turn. Despite trying everything, from selling off old tractors to working from dawn until late at night, Walter could no longer keep up with the skyrocketing payments. The bank was indifferent to his pleas and did not care about the stories this land had witnessed over the past century. They only wanted one thing: money. Then, one day, he had no choice left. With trembling hands, Walter placed a sign in front of the farm gate: "Liquidation, everything must go." The bold letters felt as if they were etched into his heart. Beneath the sign, he wrote a small note: "Thank you for 60 wonderful years." He did not tell anyone about this. He continued to wake up early, to bring vegetables to the market as always, but people began to notice the change. There was no longer the gentle smile when he handed a bag of carrots to a regular customer, no more the bright eyes when the children ran up to ask him about the old harvests. And when the townspeople saw the liquidation sign, they knew that not just a farm was being lost, but a piece of the town's very soul was about to disappear. They wanted to help, but no one knew how. Then, someone did the unexpected. A young reporter, newly hired at the local newspaper, decided to interview Walter. She did not expect much, just another story about a farm taken by the bank. But she did not realize that with a small article, she would ignite something unimaginable. Walter Hayes did everything he could. He cut back on all expenses, sold the old tractors he once believed he would pass down to his grandchildren, and worked tirelessly from before dawn until nightfall. He even sold the mementos of his wife, her favorite hairpins, the teapot set she used every morning, all just to keep the farm running. But it was never enough. As each month passed, the bank sent another letter, and each letter carried the same cold message: his debt was growing larger. Walter had never missed a payment in 30 years. He had done everything right. But now, none of that mattered. When the bank changed ownership, the people sitting behind the desks didn't care about history, didn't care about community or tradition. They only cared about profit. They looked at the numbers and reached a simple conclusion. The small farm no longer fit the modern financial model. And thus, Walter Hayes was no longer a dedicated farmer, but merely a debt to be processed. He tried to persuade them. He met with the branch manager, bringing documents proving he had never been late, that his farm was still operating well. He spoke of the harvests he had grown, of how he supplied vegetables to the town, of the families he had helped during tough times. But all he received in return were indifferent glances and cold head shakes. "We are updating our credit policy," they said. "You need to meet the new requirements." Those requirements were impossible. They demanded a payment nearly double what he had been paying while the profits from the farm remained the same. They didn't care that no one could make that kind of money from a small farm. They didn't care that losing the farm meant Walter would lose not only his home but everything he had built in his lifetime. To them, it was just a number in their books. And Walter was not the only one. He witnessed each farm around him gradually collapse. The Lewis family, neighbors who had lived there for 3 generations, were forced to leave. The Whitaker farm, known for its vast wheat fields, was sold to a large corporation, and overnight everything was leveled to make way for industrial warehouses. And then, it was Walter's turn. Every evening, he silently sat by the kitchen table with his wife, staring at the piled-up bills, trying to find some miracle. But the miracle never came. He could not understand how everything could change so quickly. How could a farm that had fed the town be erased just because of a change in bank policy? But he understood one thing. If he couldn't find a way, the Hayes farm would vanish, just like all the other farms. A century of tradition, a lifetime of labor, all would be wiped away just because of soulless numbers on a piece of paper. And no one was on his side. Finally, after months of battling in despair, he realized he could no longer hold on to the farm. He had to accept what he had never thought he would, to give up. That morning, with trembling hands, Walter put up a sign at the farm gate. "Sale. Everything must go." Beneath that statement, he penned a small, simple yet painful note. "Thank you for 60 wonderful years." He didn't expect much. No one could help him now. But what Walter didn't know was that just 2 days later, a miraculous event would occur. An event that no one could foresee. And it would change everything. Walter didn't tell anyone about the for sale sign. He continued his work as usual, still getting up before dawn, still bringing vegetables to the small market in town, but those who knew him recognized that something had changed. His smile was no longer whole, and his eyes were not as bright as before. The warm conversations when he delivered vegetables to the local restaurant became short and indifferent. He did everything out of habit, but everyone knew that in his heart, the farm was gone. The for sale sign shocked the town. The residents had seen many farms disappear, but no one thought it would happen to Walter Hayes. He was not just a farmer. He was a part of the community, always helping when someone needed it. He was someone the children grew up with, who taught them how to grow vegetables, how to take care of the land, someone who let them freely pick pumpkins every autumn without ever asking for anything in return. No one could imagine this town without his farm. One afternoon, while Walter was organizing some old items to sell, a small car pulled up in front of the gate. A young girl got out, carrying a camera and a notebook. She introduced herself as Rachel Carter, a reporter for the local newspaper. She had seen the for sale sign and wanted to write an article about the Hayes farm. Walter initially didn't want to talk. For him, this was just another sad story in a series of stories about lost farms. But Rachel didn't give up. She asked about the farm, about how it had supported the community all these years, about the traditions his family had preserved over 3 generations. Gradually, he began to tell. He recounted those early mornings when he was a boy, following his father into the fields in the biting cold. He spoke of the harsh drought seasons during which he and his wife tried to help the people in town, about the bountiful harvests when the children ran about the fields. He talked about the pain of receiving the letter from the bank, realizing that despite doing everything right, he still couldn't keep this land. Rachel listened, took notes, and snapped a few photos of the farm and the for sale sign at the gate. When she left, Walter thought it would just be a small article, a story that perhaps only a few people in town would read. He had no idea it would spread faster than anything he had ever seen. 2 days later, the photo of the for sale sign appeared on social media. Someone had posted it with the caption, 3 generations supporting the community now must leave due to banking policies. The post quickly attracted hundreds, then thousands of shares. Those who had lived in the town but had moved away began to share memories of Walter, about how he had helped them when they were young, about the times he brought food to struggling families. Those who had never known Walter also began to take an interest, for his story was not just the story of an old farmer. It was a story of injustice, of values being washed away by a world that only cared about profit. The major press began to get involved. A national newspaper published an article about Walter, accompanied by a photo of his farm in the sunset, with the for sale sign standing lonely at the gate. Television stations contacted Rachel, requesting interviews with him. And then, something unexpected happened. That evening, when Walter was sitting in the grain storage, organizing old tools he had once hoped to pass on to his grandchild, the landline phone in the house suddenly rang. He slowly walked in, picked up the receiver, thinking it might be a neighbor wanting to buy something from the sale. But the voice on the other end left him stunned. "Mr. Hayes, please hold. The president wants to talk to you." Walter almost dropped the receiver. For a moment, he thought it was a prank, that someone was teasing him. But then, another voice came through. "Mr. Hayes, I read about your story. Please tell me about the farm." And so for 20 minutes, Walter spoke with the President of the United States. Not about politics, not about banks or laws, but about the things he truly understood. About the land, about the fields, about the cows he had raised from birth, about the seasons he had worked so hard to cultivate. When the conversation ended, the President said just one thing: "We cannot let family farms like yours disappear. Give me 2 days." Walter hung up the receiver, his heart pounding. He didn't know what would happen. But after months of feeling like just a number on a piece of paper, for the first time, he felt that someone was truly listening. The next morning, as Walter finished his usual work of milking the cows, a strange sound echoed from afar. It wasn't the sound of tractors or delivery trucks, but the smooth hum of a luxury car driving down the dirt road leading to the farm. He stood still, squinting towards the gate, where a sleek black SUV came to a stop. The car door opened, and 2 men in dark suits stepped out. They were not the cold-faced bank employees he was used to facing. There was no rush, no eyes demanding payment, but a respectful demeanor. One of them approached, pulling out a card from his coat pocket, flipping it open to reveal the official seal of the White House. "Mr. Hayes?" the man asked, his voice calm but firm. "We have been sent to ensure that this farm remains in your family." Walter looked at them, his heart racing. For months, he had grown accustomed to bad news, notifications from the bank saying everything was about to end. But this time it was different. They walked into the kitchen, where Helen, his wife, was making tea. They had never hosted such important guests in their lives. The 2 men pulled up chairs in front of Walter, placing a thick folder on the table. "The current financial system has created too much injustice for farmers like you," one of them explained. "The President has directed us to find a solution. Arbitrary banking policies will no longer have the power to dictate the fate of family farms like yours." Walter picked up the folder, his hand trembling slightly. "So, what will happen?" The man pointed to a page where a simple signature could reverse everything he thought had been lost. "Just sign here, and this farm will never be forced to sell by the bank again. The new terms will ensure that family farms like yours are protected from unfair policy changes." Walter looked at Helen. She placed her hand over his, squeezing gently, her eyes filled with emotion. For months, they had thought it was all over. But now, with just one signature, everything could change. He picked up the pen, slowly placing the tip on the paper, and signed. As the last stroke was made, one of the men smiled and closed the folder. "The President has a message for you," he said as he stood up, adjusting his suit jacket. "He wants you to remember that there are things more important than money. And a family farm is one of them." Walter said nothing, just nodded, his eyes moist. He looked out the window, where the morning light was shining over his fields. He had fought all his life to protect this land, and at the very last moment, this land had not forsaken him. But the story does not end here. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, a tense meeting was unfolding in the bank director's office. He was not at all prepared for what was about to happen. When 3 men in black suits entered, bringing with them government-sealed documents, the whole room seemed to freeze. "Your changes in credit policy have plunged hundreds of farmers into hardship," one of them said. "That will not continue." The bank director swallowed hard. He quickly flipped through the documents in front of him, his eyes tense as he read the new terms. The policies they had imposed on small farms were now completely invalidated. Unjust loans were being reversed. And from now on, family farms would be protected against unreasonable credit changes. Everything changed in the blink of an eye. And Walter Hayes not only kept his farm, he had become a symbol for thousands of other farmers. 2 days later, as the sun just began to rise over the fields, Walter Hayes woke up as he did every day, pulling his old coat over his shoulders and stepping out the door. But this time, his footsteps were lighter, and his eyes were no longer heavy with the worries that had burdened him for months. The farm was still here. Not only that, it had become a symbol of perseverance, of justice, and of values that cannot be measured by money. News of the policy change spread quickly. Farmers who once thought they would lose everything were now receiving phone calls from the bank, not to demand repayment, but to inform them that their loans had been adjusted under fairer terms. The Whitaker family could return to their farm, with the wheat fields they once planted welcoming the sunlight once again. The Lewis family, Walter's close neighbors, no longer faced the prospect of leaving their ancestral land. The whole town erupted in a wave of hope that no one had dared to dream of. At the Hayes farm, life resumed as if no upheaval had ever occurred. Each morning, Walter and his wife still sat together in their small kitchen, enjoying a hot cup of coffee while listening to the roosters crow outside. But there was one new thing. Their grandson, Tommy, had begun to take part in the work on the farm. The 12-year-old boy held a small shovel in his hands, walking beside his grandfather, his eyes sparkling with eagerness as he listened to tales of past harvests, of the days when Walter himself was just a boy walking alongside his father, learning how to care for the land. The small roadside store remained open as usual, still showcasing baskets of fresh vegetables neatly arranged, still having handwritten signs reminding customers that they could take anything they needed, and if they were in difficulty, they could pay with whatever they had, a jar of honey, a basket of apples, or simply a word of thanks. Everything stayed the same because Walter Hayes had never farmed to become wealthy. He did this because it was his life, the legacy he wanted to leave for future generations. The clearance sign that once stood at the farm gate no longer hung there. Instead, it was displayed on the wall in the old grain storage, as a reminder of the days when everything seemed to have come to an end. When someone asked about its story, Walter would just smile, and instead of recounting the call from the president or the men in suits stepping out from the White House, he would point towards the fields ahead and speak about the upcoming harvest, about the rows of vegetables that he and Tommy were planting, about the things that really matter in life. The story of Walter Hayes is not just about a farm being saved, but about the values it represents. In an increasingly money-driven world, people sometimes forget that there are things that cannot be quantified by numbers on a balance sheet. Family farms are not just plots of land to cultivate, but places that build community, nurture new generations, and preserve timeless values. And thanks to a simple sign, a story that spread, and a person who listened, family farms like Walter's will continue to exist. Not just today, but forever.